If you're thinking of buying a new build property, either as a first home buyer or as an investor, you've probably seen articles like this coming up in the New Zealand media over the last couple of weeks. Developers increasing the price of properties midway through building those properties. Hi, I'm Ed McKnight, economist here at Opus Partners, and in today's video, we're going to talk about, well, can developers do this, and when can they do this? How can they do this, and what can I do to protect myself as somebody considering purchasing a new build? Just before we dive into the details of the contracts though, we've got to ask ourselves, well, why is the price of building increasing? Why is it that developers want to pass that cost on? And it comes down to that the cost of building properties here in New Zealand is on the rise. Take a look at the price of structural logs and how that has changed over the last 12 months. The price is up 24%. But it's not just the price of timber that's up, the cost of bricks, the cost of fixtures and fittings. It's all on the rise. And because of that, developers are saying, it's going to cost me a lot more money to build this house compared to what I thought it was going to be. I need to pass some of that cost on, otherwise I'm going to lose money building this house. Now you're probably saying, well, how do I make sure that I'm protected? We've got to understand the two different types of contracts we have here in New Zealand. On one hand, we've got progressive payments or stage claim builds. Now this is essentially a build contract. You are hiring the builder to build you a house. On the other hand, we have turnkey contracts. Now, this is where you sign a contract with a developer to buy a house at a fixed price. It just so happens that that house or property has not been built yet. And it's important to note that there is a scale of how easy or hard it is for a developer to increase the price of that new build. Now, progressive payments contracts, those build contracts that we just spoke about, they're a little bit easier for the developer to pass on the cost increases. Turnkey contracts, wee bit harder, but it doesn't mean that it's impossible. And the actual rate of how easy or hard it is to increase the price of your specific new build comes down to the quality of your contract. And so it's going to be different based on the contract that you yourself have signed up for. Now, it's important to note that under progressive payments, a build contract, there are three main different contracts we use here in New Zealand. Standard NZ, that's a government one, certified builders, and also master build. Now, the amount that a developer can increase the price for when you're building a house depends on which contract you're using. Now, under the Standard NZ contract, the developer can only increase the price by the industry average. Now, that is created and that data comes from Statistics New Zealand, and there's a formula that determines how much they can increase the price by. Now, if the industry average is 4%, but the developer, your developer, has faced price increases of 10%, they can only pass on that industry average. Now, that's not the same as certified builders and master build, because under those contracts, the developer can pass on their actual cost increases. Now, where these contracts also differ is coming down to the level of evidence that the developer has to provide for you. Under both Standards NZ and certified builders, they've got to provide you evidence. They've either got to show you the stats, show you the quotes, or show you the receipts of those increased costs. Under the master build contract, they don't have to do that. They don't have to provide any evidence that they have actually faced that cost increase. They can just pass it on. Now, that does mean that a master build contract, under that, it's much easier for the developer or for the builder to pass those costs on to you and ask you to pay more money. Under Standards NZ, and admittedly certified builders, it's a wee bit harder. There's more hoops that the developer has to jump through. Now, you might be saying, well, does this mean I should never sign a master build contract? Look, that's not what we're saying, because there may be a really good property being built in a great location by a good quality developer, and they may happen to use master build contracts, which are extremely popular. Now, if you walk in and say, I want to use a Standards NZ contract, they're not going to change the contract just because you have asked for it, because you're only one person. They'll sell the property to someone else. But what's important to know is if there is a good property that you want to buy that has a master build contract, make sure you read it. Make sure you understand when can the price increase, and make sure that if that happened, you wouldn't be left in a position where you wouldn't be able to pay the additional money. Now let's talk about turnkeys, because these are actually fixed price contracts. So you're probably thinking, well, how is it that a developer is going to increase the price of my property when I've signed a contract to buy it for a fixed price? And what it comes down to is, let's say that you go unconditional on a property, you're locked in to buy that, and that happens in June. The developer isn't always locked in at the same time. So they might not go unconditional for another couple of months. In this example, we're saying December. Now, what does that mean? Well, there is a period where you are locked in. You're unconditional. You're going to buy that property, but the developer is not locked in on that specific contract. Now, that can happen for a lot of really genuine reasons. The developer may need to reach a certain number of pre-sales in order for the bank to lend them money. If they don't get all of those pre-sales, they need the ability to cancel your contract. It could be that the developer needs to go and get resource consent. Now, if resource consent comes back and there need to be some changes, the developer needs flexibility to still change that property. But what is the risk here? Well, the risk is that between that time that you go unconditional and the developer go unconditional, well, the price of building materials goes up. Now, if that happens and it squeezes the developer's margin, so they're not making as much or not making any money anymore, then the developer still has the ability to cancel the contract. Now, let's talk about how this might actually happen in practice. So let's say the developer comes back to me, I'm unconditional, and say, Ed, we're going to cancel your contract and we want you to sign a new one for $20,000 more because that's our cost increase. Now, the developer can cancel my contract, but unlike a progressive payments build, I don't have to re-sign. I don't have to pay the extra money. But if all other properties have increased in value as well, and hey, I'm not going to be able to go find something cheaper, then I may re-sign that contract at that higher price. Now, this often happens in a hot market where the developer believes and has the confidence that, hey, if I put up the price, I'm going to be able to sell that property to someone else because there are a lot of buyers around. So it does tend to happen in markets like this where there's a lot of competition, especially for new builds. Now, you're probably thinking, Ed, I get there are some benefits to new builds. Tax incentives to buy them, lower deposits, but there are some risks associated with them. And I would agree with you. There are definitely some things you need to think about if you're going down the new build route. But what's important to also say is don't hold out for the perfect contract. And what I mean by that is you don't necessarily want to transfer all of the risk from yourself over to the developer. Now, why do I say that? Well, if the developer carries all of the risk, 100% of the risk, what are they going to do? They're going to increase the price of the property and sell it at a higher amount. Why? Because if there is additional risk, they need to have a better buffer so that when cost increases come, they're not going to lose money on that project. So it's not about transferring all of your risk to the developer, but being comfortable with your specific contract and knowing what you're actually signing up for. And you're going to figure that out by working with a really good quality property lawyer, someone who specializes in build contracts or turnkey contracts. Now, it's often said that the devil is in the detail, but what's important to say, especially with new build contracts, is the quality is in the contract. So the risks that you take on are going to depend on the wording in your specific contract. And that contract's going to be different from my one. It's going to be different from the wording in somebody else's contract. So you want to make sure you're working with those property-based lawyers, property specialist lawyers, in order to make sure that you do have a high quality contract. And if you'd like a recommendation for this, we've got a list of the top 5 property lawyers in New Zealand on our website for you to check out. And hey, make sure you hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel, because every Wednesday at 10 a.m. we release a new video with strategies, tactics, and insights to help you become a more successful property investor here in New Zealand.